Hi everyone, I wanted to talk to you about the challenges of decoupage today. Many of you have written to me and have said that you really have trouble with decoupage. And there's a lot of things that you can do ahead of time to make your decoupaging easier. The first thing I wanted to talk about is different types of papers. There are different weights of paper, and I wanted to start out with the lighter weight papers and talk about them. Basically, the lighter the weight, the paper, the harder it is to decoupage. That's an overall truth with decoupaging. If you're going to be working with lighter papers, I prefer to use paper that is bright white, that's 28 pounds as opposed to 20 pounds. And this is called multi-purpose. And what I have found is that, well, first of all, you can see through this one. Like you can see the background showing through here. Or with this case, with this one, you cannot see through it. That's a difference in 8 pounds, and it's also the difference in a better paper. When you can see through the paper like this one, that means that there's more holes or more pores in the paper. And so then what's going to happen is this paper is going to lift up and bubble much easier than this one that you cannot see through. So these pretty much are the lightest weights that I would go with, either 20 or 28, but I do prefer the 28, and it's the easiest to print. As you go up in weights, I love printing on the cardstock. And why do I like that? Because there's almost no bubbling, almost no puckering at all, and it just goes on really easily. What do I use cardstock for? Well, this is still very printable, and this is a 65-pound weight. I find that it's very hard to print on anything that's over 65 pounds. And so these are some designs that I've created, and I really like this, especially when I'm teaching the class, because I've created the background in Photoshop, but then I've already got the base coating done, so it's much easier, whether I'm teaching or for my students who are going to be painting with these. And so what do I do with them? Then I came in and very easily just decoupaged it onto this piece of wood. Another reason I like the heavier pieces of paper, the 65-pound weight, if it's going to be a freestanding surface, meaning it's not going to be framed, there's not going to be glass over it to protect it, you want to make sure that the paper that you use is very strong. So this is the finished piece. And you can see that I have just a little bit of the wood on the outside edge. And this goes into a basket for napkins and whatever. And so this could get beat up a little bit. So I want to make sure that I have very nice, sturdy paper. Another really great paper to use is matte photo paper. And let's see what the pound is. It's 44 pound. And so this is made for printing. And this is for inkjet. I would make sure I would get something that can go into a laser printer. I know a lot of people try spraying their items that have been printed on inkjet with like Krylon, but I'm here to tell you that it's still going to probably bleed. I would rather have you use a laser printer than spraying with the Krylon and making sure that it's not going to bleed, than have you be in the middle of decoupaging and all of a sudden you lose half the print or it smears all over the place. It's much easier to work with laser versus inkjet. But try to find a matte paper that's heavyweight, 44 pounds, and it's really good quality. Another great source of papers is the pre-printed scrapbook papers. And what I like about them is they're 12 inches, and so they can fit on so many of our surfaces. But I wanted to say that it's very important that you keep your background subtle. I've seen, these are nice, subtle backgrounds, as opposed to something as busy as this, or even something like this, and even worse, this or this. Remember that when you're painting and you want to put something over it, you want the background to stay in the background. You want it to support your main icon. And you don't want it to distract, as opposed to this. I'm having a hard time looking at the background versus the flower. or even worse would be this. You can't even hardly see the flower. So as you choose these papers, and I'd say that these papers range, because this one's range in poundage. This one's probably about 65. I think this one's more in the 40 poundage, but either way, because these are laser printed, they're not going to bleed, and because they're a heavier weight, they just lay down so easily. The last thing I wanted to talk about is decoupaging with napkins. Napkins are really wonderful because they have such pretty patterns on them. The problem is they're very thin, can't get much thinner, and they really are made to be more biodegradable. This is a better one. I try to spend more money. But the other problem too is they're 2-ply. What I always try to do is to remember to take this second ply off of it, so I'm only going to be working with the top portion. There's some patterning also in the paper where there's like little holes or little dots. I'm not going to worry about that when I decoupage, because chances are it's not going to show up once the paper's down anyway. So what I did is, this is just a little coaster, and what I did is I pre-sealed it with multi-purpose sealer, and then I sanded it. The beginning of your painting or your beginning of your decoupage will determine whether or not your project is going to be successful. It's very important that you seal your surface first. In the case of wood, if I were to put the decoupage medium down, the wood grain could come up, and then you'd be able to see that through this napkin that I'm about to put down. Okay, so I have my decoupage medium, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to very quickly, what's really important is you want to try to keep your fingers clean. I find most of the mistakes I make is when I get glue on my fingers, because then what happens, I either tear or I lift or I make my surface bubble. So I very quickly did that. I like to leave the napkin a little bit bigger than the area that I'm going to be decoupaging. So this is really a nice napkin. I've worked with other ones from some dollar stores, and they are just so thin and so porous. They don't want to lay down at all, and they immediately start puckering. So now once it's down, and while it's still wet, I come in with a brayer. If you don't have a brayer, you can use a paint bottle or something that is round and solid. But I find that I want to make sure that it's adhered and that I get all the air bubbles out. And then I'm going to let that dry. So I want to show you what happens if you don't let it dry. What's going to happen is you're going to see how it immediately starts bubbling up. Can you see all those bubbles? And I could actually start tearing and ripping, and that's what's about to happen here. Remember, I'm showing you what not to do. The best thing you should do when you are decoupaging is let your underneath coat dry first and then come in. Because now I've got all these little ripples going on, and it just tore right there. And I did that purposely so that you would see that it's best to let it just sit and wait. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the other side. I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you how nice it lays down when you let it dry first. Okay, so now the paper is completely dry. And I wanted to show you something. On here, I had glue on my finger and I pushed it down and I lifted a little bit of the color. But, you know, in the scope of what's important, I don't think you're going to notice that. And I can always go over that with a little bit of green paint. So the first thing I do is I just cut away the excess paper. I could fold it over the edges, but I did not center it, and so like this side would not fold over all the way. Now I'm going to come in with a thin coat of matte decoupage medium. And why do I use matte? Well, in this case it's a coaster and it's pre-printed, so you could probably use glossy or even a satin finish. Generally I always use matte because I want to paint over it. And if you're going to use glossy or satin, a lot of times that will repel your acrylic paints. So you can see I'm not going to go over this a lot, and I came in with a really thin coat because if I do, this is going to start pulling it and ripping the napkin. So once this dry, I can come in and I can put multiple coats on, and then I'll have a really nice coaster. Now we're going to start working on the paper mache box. I have some of my favorite gift tissue paper from Hobby Lobby here, and I'm going to be showing you how to decoupage onto chipwood or paper mache boxes with this very thin paper, because both of those are hard to work with. I'm going to be discussing how to decoupage onto paper mache because we've been talking about how to paint on paper in my Facebook group, Creative Innovations in Painting. And chipwood or paper mache can be very difficult to work on because it will bubble and warp and do all kinds of crazy things that are very unpredictable. So there's two different ways that I prepare the surface before I actually come in and decoupage over it. The first method I use is I come in with a multi-purpose sealer. This one's by Decoupage Americana. I do not apply the sealer directly on here because you want to use as little moisture as possible. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this mushroom sponge by Plaid, and I'll actually put some out onto my palette paper. You could use a foam plate or some other water resistant surface. So then what I'm going to do is I've got a nice dry sponge, and I'm going to just work this into my sponge. And then I'm going to come over and apply it to my surface. The reason I'm using a dry sponge and the reason I put the sealer directly onto the palette paper is so that I would not have excess moisture that might raise up the paper that's in the chipwood box. Because even though it looks good, after a while it might start bubbling. And I'm going to come around and I'm going to do the sides at the same time. Now these sponges last forever because as soon as I'm done using them, whether I've got paint in them or sealer, I just go ahead and I put it in water and immediately wash them out. And then they're just wonderful to use over and over and over again. So you don't have to worry about ruining your sponge by putting sealer into it. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And now I'm going to set to the side while it dries, and I'm going to show you my next method. Now the second method I'm going to do is I'm using the Americana Decoupage matte glue or finish. It's very important that we use matte because as we apply the paper over this and when we decoupage it, I want to apply washes and paints that are water-based. And if you use a semi-gloss or glossy sealer or glue, it's going to bubble up. So that's why we have to make sure we use a matte finish. So I'm going to do the same thing where I've got my sponge and I'm working it into the decoupage medium. And I'm going to apply it in the same way. Now I will tell you that this is going to lay more on the surface where the sealer actually seeps into pores. It's very important that you use a dry sponge and that you just set the decoupage medium on a plate or on your palette paper. I will tell you that this does not move as easy as the sealer did, because this really is more of a glue. Okay, and I'm going to set this aside and watch to see if there's any bubbles, and we'll see what happens. The lid puckered just a little bit, but this is the lid that I had originally sealed with the decoupage medium. That's why I advise now that you use a sealer first, because I wanted to show you the difference between sealing it with decoupage medium and sealing it with an actual multi-purpose sealer. The sealer really does seep into the pores, and then the decoupage medium really lays on top and binds to the papers, so that's why it puckered. But this will lay down and it will be fine. This is the lid that I put the sealer on, and I really like it because nothing bubbled up and it looks nice and smooth. So I don't have to sand this, and we can move forward with decoupaging it. So what I have is I've cut out about an 11-inch square or larger, this might be 12-inch square, piece of tissue paper. This is my 10-inch lid. I have my dry mushroom sponge. I have poured some matte decoupage medium on my palette paper. So what I'm going to do is I've loaded my sponge up, and I'm only going to do half of the lid. And then I lay this down carefully, making sure it goes over the edge. You want to make sure your hands are dry and that they don't get any glue on them. If you get glue on your hands, what's going to happen is you're going to tear the paper. And this is a voice of experience speaking here, because I have done this many times. My hand gets dirty, and so it's nice to just have some type of damp paper towel or a wet wipe or something. So now what I'm going to do is I'm pulling this back just a little bit. And you have to work very, very quickly with decoupage. And see, I just put my fingers in it. And then I just very slowly smooth it out. Now it will begin to pucker a little bit. There's not much you can do about that. I just tried to work out all the air bubbles with my fingers. Now you see me rubbing. I'm not rubbing hard. I'm just using the pads of my fingers to push this out. Now there was a little bit of decoupage glue there, so you have to feel that. If it feels sticky at all, you have to be careful that you don't keep rubbing there, because the paper will tear. So I'm using my fingers to work this out, and you can see even though this is tissue paper, it works wonderfully. So you can see I'm just working out all these little puckers to make sure I don't get any hard lines or built up edges or ripples or whatever you want to call them, pleats. I mean, you may get a few, but in the scope of what's important, we're going to be putting more things over this, and I don't think you'll notice it. So now one thing that I do differently is I've learned that no matter what paper you're using, you need to let it dry before you come in with the top coat. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to let it dry. And so now that I have it on there, I want to make sure that it's really secured. So I'm going to use my brayer. And your brayer should be clean too, because same thing with your fingers. If you have any glue on your brayer, see how that's stuck to it? It's going to pull up the paper. So that's nice and smooth. It's looking pretty good. We'll let that dry, and then I'll show you the next step. And you have to remember that you need to put this into water immediately. Now, if for some reason this dries, or you have paint dry it, I've seen some people cut along the edges. You really don't need to do that. This is a really helpful hint. So what I do is I take some alcohol and I have this little ceramic plate or saucer, and I just put some in there and I'll leave it in there for a few minutes, and then I just twirl it around, and any paint or decoupage medium that's water-based or acrylic-based will be broken down by the alcohol and it will all come out. So you don't need to cut your sponges. Okay, so this is all dry. What we're going to do is going to come around and I'm just going to turn it upside down and cut along the edges. This is so much easier than trying to cut a circular piece that matches perfectly and then coming back. We want to keep this nice and smooth and even. Okay, so this curled up a little bit, so I just didn't have enough glue there. So what I'm going to do is just scoot a little bit of the decoupage medium underneath here, as far as I can see that it's not sticking, and I'll just press that down. I'm going to come along the edges and make sure everything's nice and secure. I'm using a very old brush, by the way. I would not recommend using any good brushes. Okay, I want to show you what happens when you just merely rinse out your brush and you don't clean it after you have decoupage medium in it. Look at this. It will ruin your brushes. So what I'm going to do is show you how wonderful rubbing alcohol works with it. So I'm going to just soak this for a few minutes and then it will come back and I'll show you how it works just nicely. I'm going to come back over this and I'm going to just use a large brush now to put it on. I should probably have a bigger brush than I do, but I think if I work quickly I'll be fine. Now you do not want to have too much medium in your brush, because what will happen is if it gets too thick, and if we use anything over the top of it that does not chemically match, scratch it. So I'm just continuing going over. Now it might raise up again, like some of these are raising up. That's okay. We're not going to worry about that. We know that it was nice and smooth the first time. Now this might have even a little air bubble down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to just go over it. We're not going to fret about those bubbles because it was nice and smooth to begin with. And I'm going to put it to the side and let it dry. And then I'll repeat this step. So we want at least 2 thin coats over this paper. So I'm going to set this aside and then I'll show you how it just goes right back down. So you can see it's all smooth again, but I'm going to put another coat on, a nice thin coat. So again, I work very quickly. Okay, we're going to let that dry and then we'll do the sides of the box. It's only been about 5 minutes and the rubbing alcohol is already starting to break down the dried decoupage medium, because you saw this was like a rock before. So I'm probably going to let this soak for like a whole half an hour and then I'll be able to use some soap on it and get it nice and clean. Okay, I want to show you what happened to my brush. Remember, this was the one that was rock hard. Well, I've had it in the rubbing alcohol, and I periodically have gone through to open it up. But look, it is a regular brush that I can use again. I mean, This was never a brush that I would have used for floating anyway, but look at that. It's all opened. It's perfectly fine, and it's very flexible now, and I'll be able to use it for base coating and a variety of other things rather than throwing it away. So rubbing alcohol can really be your friend when it comes to ruined brushes. So just remember to clean out your brushes really well after you use decoupage medium, and you won't have to worry about going through this process. The top of the lid is dry, so we're going to continue to add the tissue paper to the sides of the box. Instead of a mushroom sponge, I use an old brush that's dry to apply the medium. And I'm going to add it directly to the sides of the box and work the brush so that the medium is very smooth and that there's not a lot of streaks that you can get with a brush. Because we're going to meet the top of the lid, it's really important to line up the edge that has not been cut, because that's nice and crisp and it has a nice even edge. So use that edge to place against the top of the lid and then bring it down. So as you lay it down, smooth it out. Try to keep it a little bit taut as you lay it down, and then smooth it out with your fingers, very much like how we did the lid of the box. I allow the first piece to dry, and then I come back in and I just overlap the pieces a little bit. I apply the decoupage right on top, and then I go through the same process, laying the paper down and smoothing it out. Once it's dry, before I add any more medium to it over the top of it, what I do is I either cut it or I fold it under. So in this case, I'm going to fold it under. So I place the medium along the inside of the lid, and then I simply roll it over and press it into place. Now we're going to continue doing the sides of the box, and I've already began to put the paper on, and I've allowed this to dry. And I wanted to show you how I do it. So I put this medium on in small amounts, and then I keep adding it as I go. Otherwise it's going to dry. So what I'm going to do is just go over this a little bit. And this is the bottom of our box, and so I want the text to reflect the proper position, so the text is going up and down this way. And then I'm going to just slightly overlap it. And it is challenging because it does begin to pucker right away. So I like to pull it taut as I go. I'm going to smooth it out. Now pull this back. And then we'll overlap with some more decoupage medium. And then pull it taut, smooth it out, fold it back. This is where the wetness was. So I'm going to slightly overlap. And I'll pull it taut, smooth it out, and then I'm going to come in and just trim it right there. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is let it completely dry, and I can either fold in the edges and then put the piece on the bottom, or I can simply trim it. So the box has dried, and so what I'm going to do is just come in, and I've decided to trim it, and I'm going to just hold the box on an angle and go around the bottom and the top in this method until I'm completely done. I do angle my scissors just a little bit. Then when I'm done, I'll simply come in and put some medium along the edge and just fold it over. Once the box is decoupage, you can then paint over the paper and put any design you want on it. This is my hydrangea design where I stenciled over the paper and then painted the flower. On this next design, I painted, sponge, and stenciled on the one side and then painted the flower. I love the way the paper remains in the background and just creates interest to the design but does not distract. So this is my butterfly and blossom lid that I painted, and you can see now, can you see the paper just glowing through the background? I just love it because you can just do so much with this tissue paper, and I just kind of tinted the sides just a little bit so you could see, really see the paper there. I'm going to be teaching this for the first Artful webinar class, and I would really like for you to join me. We're going to be using not only decoupage, we're going to be also using a variety of mediums, acrylics, and we're going to learn how to use washes. We're going to do something different with stencils using color pencils and washes, and then the butterfly was done with acrylics and color pencils. So I'm going to show you him up close. Look at all that awesome texture in there. We're going to learn how to create all that texture and make this realistic butterfly together. The first class is going to be July 20th, and I'm only going to have a handful of seats because we want to make sure everyone is going to get one-on-one attention. This is going to be a live class. It's not going to be a video. I'm going to be able to look at your pieces via the internet, and you're going to be able to see up close what I'm doing and ask me questions as we paint along together. I'm really looking forward to doing the very first Artful webinar class, and I'll hope you join me there. See you in class. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've learned a lot about the challenges of decoupaging. If you have not subscribed to my channel, I would love for you to do so. And also, if you learned a lot from this video, please give me a thumbs up. So until next time, may painting always bring you joy.